You know, in the United States, we do not have just one educational system. We have at least 50 educational systems and many more private universities and colleges. So in a sense, our higher education institutions reflect the world at large. But I think many people think that perhaps just because they are universities, academia represents a more progressive form of thought than the world at large. Can I ask that question to our next guest, Dr. Gerggory Johnson? Welcome.
Thank you.
Do you think there's any truth to that schools or the university life in general are more progressive than the world at large?
I do, to a degree. I feel that universities are also very conservative, you know, and but because they are the intellectual types, it is a bastion of free thinking most times. Though certainly that's not always the case.
Now, your work explores those very sort of tensions.
Yes.
Talk to me about how you began this sort of work and what the challenges are. You teach at the University of San Francisco, correct?
I do, yes. I began this work at the University of Vermont. That's where I was a tenured professor for 12 years prior to coming to USF. I had always been interested in social justice issues, and my field of public policy allows for that type of research through a subfield called social equity. And I began to notice that voices were not being heard. And so I began to speak for these communities that were not being heard.
And when you said that voices weren't being heard, you meant in academia specifically?
Yes.
At the administrative level or behind the desk or?
Well, I think all the way around. I do believe that most again, colleges and universities tend to be very conservative, and the faculty tend to research what I call safe spaces, safe areas. But very little was written on the topics I was interested in, specifically race, gender, LGBT issues, and social class. And so this is what sort of got me on that quest to sort of start speaking for these communities that were marginalized. And
now, as you say, your perception is that by their very nature, universities are conservative, meaning they hang on to what they have.
Yes.
Which probably means also they hang on to funders, probably a lot of family connections, you know, years of history. How does a black man who wants to talk about social justice issues and some LGBT issues, how do you beat through that plexiglass wall?
Not easily. Trust me, not easily. I believe it takes thick skin to do that, to be the person who wants to stand up for right. And because there are many African-American faculty who are LGBT and a whole other myriad of intersections, and they don't choose to go that route. But I believe in being authentic. And so for me, I had no choice, and that's one of the reasons why I was recruited by the University of San Francisco, which does, I believe, stand for the most part on social justice.
Right.
And I say for the most part because, again, there are always pockets of any organization who may not necessarily go with the mission of the institution. So.
Right. Where was it harder to get these issues addressed? And I assume it was University of Vermont in Burlington?
Yes.
So I spent a wonderful summer there.
Yes.
In the summer stock. I mean, Burlington is about as liberal as Vermont gets, and certainly the East Coast.
That's right.
What was harder, getting these issues to the fore in Burlington or here in San Francisco?
You know, I think that's really a really great and interesting question. I did not have much pushback in Vermont. Vermont was the first state to offer same-sex marriage without being court-ordered, and they also were very involved with the Underground Railroad, which is and part of it is in Vermont. I think I honestly, no one would believe this, I received a lot more pushback here.
Well, no, that wouldn't surprise me. I mean,
Yeah.
there's that old adage about, is it better to be a small town lion or a big city mouse?
That's right.
And, in a state like Vermont, which is very intellectual, as you say,
Right.
Early before issues of anti-slavery movement, Vermont was in the fore of that. San Francisco, I think, sometimes like to think, certainly in academia, that, well, we know it all. We don't need an upstart professor from Vermont to tell us how to do social justice here.
That's exactly right.
Is there a little bit of that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think for the most part, many of my colleagues support what I do in terms of my research, but there are many that don't see the sense of it. And I currently teach in the School of Management at the University of San Francisco, which I enjoy, but certainly there are some colleagues there who definitely have a more conservative bent, and which is not me.
So how many feathers have you ruffled?
Well, I won't say that publicly, but we'll say a few, a few, because again, I come into the institution bringing myself, right, and being unapologetic about that, and sort of upsetting the apple cart,
right,
so to speak.
Now, you were born and raised in the Bronx, correct?
Yes.
So talk to me about that experience and how your childhood, growing up in the Bronx, when you came to identify as gay, how did that shape your academic present now?
Well, I think that growing up in the Bronx was a great experience. Despite what you may hear about the Bronx, when people talk about New York, they talk about New York City, Manhattan, right? But the Bronx is more, laid back, the home of hip hop, those types of things, and I saw a lot of injustices growing up. A lot of my relatives, cousins, and so forth were marginalized through the public school system. And
because of race or economics or both?
I think both. I think both. We were kind of what I would consider, low middle class community, and but very diverse. We had a lot of Jewish folks in my neighborhood, a lot of Hispanics, and some Asians, and so it was sort of melting pot. But still, I do believe that being African American was an issue for a number of my relatives as they went through the public school system, and so I got a chance to witness all of this, and now I get a chance to write about it.
Now, and then when you came out, how did that impact your family unit and your family's perceptions of you?
I think we have a don't ask, don't tell policy.
In your family?
In my family.
It still exists?
For the most part. I'm sure that most people in my family know that I'm gay, but they, no one really talks about it.
Right. Well, for you personally, how does that tension impact you when you teach? I mean, it can't just be all about up here.
Right.
It's got to be some about here, too.
Yes, I think your point is well taken. I think it gives me a sense of compassion for my students. I think when you are in a marginalized community, certainly an oppressed community, it forces you to consider the other person, regardless of what the other person stands for or their circumstances. And I'm grateful for that intersection, my race and my sexual orientation, because it does allow me to not be the proverbial professor who's unattainable or unreachable. My students know they can contact me anytime. They have my cell phone, I take great joy in that, because I know how it was for me when I was in college and graduate school, and at a lot of professors who were very unattainable, and so. Well,
academia can be an ivory tower.
Still, yes. I think that more of us are trying to break that down, but there are so many more that so many more faculty who need to go who have that old way of thinking.
Right.
So I think times have changed or are changing.
Tell me about the courses you offer, some of the subjects and the tenets you teach. What are some of the titles?
Right. So this summer I taught a wonderful course. Well, I thought it was wonderful. Hopefully my graduate students will think the same. But management theory and organization development was one of the courses. Next semester I teach public policy analysis and human resource management. And so those are the types of courses I teach. And within those courses, I always try to interject social justice, or as we refer to it as my field, social equity. At the University of Vermont, I had more leeway in terms of the courses I taught, because the curriculum was a bit more broader. Here at USF, at least in the two programs I teach in, it's more constrained, which is fine. But you know, I will always again bring myself to the course and interject what I think is important.
Right. We just have a few more moments, but you know, the last few months, actually it's over a year now, there's been this great debate in San Francisco about the history of, or the future, I should say, of City College and losing its accreditation, and now it looks like it's coming back. You know, there seems to be this sense in San Francisco that as we start our conversation that, oh, we know how to do, quote unquote, social justice, what you call social equity. If you could say something to all the people, not at the professor level, but the people who actually, you know, the boards of regents and whatnot that run our institutions here in San Francisco, from your point of view and the courses you teach, what would you say they need to learn as institutions?
Well, I think they would need to learn that, for the most part, institutions really are about doing the work that they say they're going to do. You know, and in fact, I was just speaking with a colleague at the City College, and I think they have a great mission to serve underserved populations, specifically students of color and poor white folks and all this kind of thing, and just students who want to go back for a refresher. You know, they have that mission, and so I think it's always unjust when you have a board of whatever the board is being called to say, you guys are not getting it right. I think that's unfortunate, and it misses the mark.
So maybe a little more listening to people at the professor level.
Absolutely. You know, and I think listening to the students as well. You know, we oftentimes leave them out of the equation, and you know, I'm so pleased to be here in the Bay Area and know about the unrest of students at the University of California, Berkeley during the 60s. And the students at University of San Francisco were a bit more quiet. They were good Catholic students, but they were still, you know, still there doing their thing for social justice. And so I am pleased to be in a space where that history is still living. So.
Great. Thanks for being on the show with us.
Thank you so very much.
Next up, we're going to talk about what is it like to be lesbian in the Middle East, specifically in Iran. We'll be right back.